Welcome to the Edge of Greatness podcast. The path to greatness is never linear and requires patience and consistency. Join us on our journey as we peel back the layers of success, searching for that elusive core. Each week we will explore a different component of greatness, utilizing experts who have traveled some part of the path that we are all on. We aim to uncover insights into the areas of leadership, coaching, performance, overcoming failure, the power of habits, and so much more. We are all on the edge of greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, Jon Gold. He is a mental performance coach and the owner of Go for Gold Consulting. Make sure you go check him out. He's got some pretty awesome stuff popping up all over Twitter, which is fun to watch and see how that goes. But this is actually where the first question comes from today. So after I got you to decide to come on the show, I started scoping out your Twitter, and I noticed you asked a question for your people on Twitter to list various ways to use a pen. So what I want to do today is kind of start off by, we'll just spitball back and forth a couple different ways.
Oh, wow. I love this.
To use a pen. So, I mean, obviously the most boring example is take notes. So what else we got?
Paperweight.
Paper. Okay. Hair clip. Measuring tape. Okay. That's good. Okay. What about wow, that's tough. This is kind of wild. Like it's interesting how quickly I get caught up thinking of only one thing. Yeah. And my mind just kind of reverts back to the first thing I said.
Yeah.
I like the measuring one. That's new. Bookmark.
Drumstick.
Drums. Dang, that's a good one. I used to play the drums too. How did I not come up with that one? No, but that's cool. So the main reason why I wanted to ask that question is obviously you had a point behind that. So what's the main reason for asking something like that for your people on Twitter?
The main point in asking that, Charles, and it's funny you mentioned Twitter and doing research through there. That's largely what I do for research with the guests that I have on my podcast as well. It's about flexibility. You know, our mind is so programmed to build relationships and equations out of things. So for example, I have two objects next to me, a seltzer that I drink during episodes and my wallet. My mind goes to this seltzer is larger than this wallet, right? This yellow pen is brighter than this black pen. So when we think about relationships, whenever someone thinks about a pen, we think about the relationship that we have with a pen. We write with it, right? That's obvious. That's its natural use. But it's about thinking outside of the box, expanding our awareness and being more flexible with our thinking and the way that we go about things. So that's why I posed that question.
Yeah, no, I love that because it instantly had me thinking of things. And before obviously we got on the podcast, I probably had 8 or 9 in my mind. But then obviously in the spur of the moment, we always kind of go back to the basic thing that something's used for, and we lose that creativeness. Do you feel like it's something that we can build that creative muscle over time by doing something and practicing things like that?
Yeah, I don't think I'm necessarily the most creative person in the world. So it's an interesting question that you ask as far as trying to, highlight that creative muscle. I think it certainly can be helpful to see objects and write about what other ways they could be used outside of their conventional use. I certainly think that could develop some increased awareness. But again, I think it comes down to just things that we can do outside of that example that I posted on Twitter, as far as just recognizing when we're going into default, where we're just naturally trying to protect ourselves, being comfortable, thinking about what we're used to doing and not trying new things. Being creative is about trying new things and being comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think the pen example is just one way we can do it. But I pose that in a larger scheme of things, thinking about our thought process. We get outside of this, protective dictator mind and recognize that we're beyond just the mind and that we're a whole person outside of it.
Oh, I love that. That's That's a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be when it came to like obviously asking a question about a pen, which is awesome. Now let's kind of dig into what the consulting stuff is for you, because I feel like that's the area that your obviously expertise is. What do you feel most people reach out for you with help with?
Man, this is something I'm really passionate about, Charles, because I wish it weren't this way, but I get contacted when people want help to fix something.
Okay.
And the first response I have is I don't fix.
Mm-hmm.
I say the mental game, mental performance is about enhancing your game for you and I, if it's an individual reaching out, of course, to collaborate, to engage in conversation, and for us to recognize what you have within you that we can bring to the surface. So for me, that comes through conversation and awareness building,
Yeah.
right? A lot of people come in thinking, oh, I have anxiety and I need to fix that and I need to get rid of that. When in reality, it comes into more of a natural relationship of, can I change the default setting of the relationship that I have with that anxiety? So
Right.
for that reason, I put out a tweet just today
Yeah.
where I'm talking about we need to be able to embrace the things that go on around us rather than trying to avoid it. If we're able to embrace it through acknowledging it without judgment, right? Like stress is bad, anxiety is bad. Hold
Right.
on. It just is what's happening in the moment. If I'm to judge stress and anxiety, there's care beneath that. So, in a way, if I say it's not okay to feel stressed and anxious, I'm saying it's not okay to care. Now, for some people, simply saying, like, I care about it, so being anxious is fine, may not be enough. So, for those reasons, it's about developing skills in those moments to kind of get back to baseline, of course, but in the natural sense of trying to be less of someone to run away and try to fix problems, but really to just sit with them and work through them. So I'd say that's really number one, what people come and contact me about.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that they contact you originally about fixing something. Because I wouldn't think of like mental performance as a fix, as more of it is it a fine tuning of skills to make you more adaptable to situations when things happen. That's the way I look at mental performance, and it's interesting that that's not the common perception, because in my experience, from what I've seen from people who compete and perform, anxiety, some you need some anxiety, don't you, to perform at a high level? Like if there's no anxiety, then there's no reason to up your level of performance. Like it'd be like practice, right? We don't have as much anxiety in practice, but to be a good performer, you need to be able to perform with anxiety in a high stress kind of situation, correct?
Totally. You need to have the optimal level,
Yeah.
right? So I talk to my clients about is thinking about just a simple Likert scale, 0 to 10. I literally say to 90% of my clients, if we're talking about arousal and anxiety, I'm like, on a scale of 0 to 10, where do you perform best? If 0 is, for example, you're sleeping and I could whack you with a Tempur-Pedic firm mattress pillow and you're still asleep, like that's probably not where you want to be.
Right.
A 10 would be like you just had an energy drink and you're the Energizer bunny walking around and banging on the side of the drums. So on that scale of 0 to 10, as far as your energy and arousal goes, where are you typically when you play your best? Or rather, where do you typically play at? Because we're not always going to have our best game. We're not always going to have our worst game.
Right.
But when you mention that anxiety that we need, of course we do.
Yeah.
Because that 0 is representative of I'm not being challenged enough. This is boring. And that 10 is I'm being asked to, dive off of a 20-foot jumping board, and I've never swam in my life before.
Right.
Like that's like terrifying to someone, and that's not helpful. So that 0 to 10 is kind of where I find myself talking to my clients about.
And ideally, we want our athletes or performers to be somewhere in that middle ground so they can hopefully achieve like a flow state or a in the zone type of moment, correct?
I would say that oftentimes they're going to be somewhere towards the middle. Some might be closer to a 6, 7, or 8. Some might be
Right.
closer to a 3, 4, 5. It's interesting you bring up the zone. To me, I almost never talk about the zone.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so why is that?
To me, I don't talk about the zone because it comes down to effort. And I feel like if we're talking about trying to get into the zone, it comes off as something that we're trying to achieve rather than just competing in the moment, regardless of how you feel.
Right.
Obviously, the zone is more than just a feeling. So I don't want to like oversimplify a very complex ideal. But I just think if we're trying to get in the zone, it's more unlikely that we're not going to get there. And it's something that can just naturally happen, by being in the moment, by enjoying the sport, by being in that optimal challenge level. That's certainly a part of the course.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the zone just happens. It's not something that we're actively trying to pursue. Other people and other practitioners may have a different approach to that, and that's totally cool.
Right. No, and I love that you have that approach, because for me personally, I never made it into the zone while performing if I was trying to get there. It was always just part of what happened. Things started to go a certain way. I found myself in a certain rhythm. And the next thing you know, everything just kind of fades away. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm unstoppable. And it was never something that I set out to be like, well, today's going to be my day. I'm going to be in the zone. It's my show. And that's going to be it. And I agree. I don't think there's any kind of way to just do that. So I love that perspective.
I've had similar experiences. There's one moment, maybe two that come to mind. Overweight 8th grade version of myself, travel basketball. I think we're playing in Salem, Massachusetts, if I recall. And I remember like tip off, ball gets kicked out to me, and I shoot a mid-range jump shot and I make it. And then the next position, I make it. And then the next, I made 4 shots in a row. And that's something that like I was capable of doing, but it doesn't happen every day, of course. And I remember feeling like I can't even like feel myself shoot the ball.
Yeah.
And it's just happening. And of course, like you just said, Charles, I didn't show up to Salem saying, I'm going to get in the zone today. And I'm going to go 4 for 4 in the first 4 minutes of the game. But what I do remember is that there was a whistle. I got taken out and I sat on the bench, and I remember the whole game felt completely different. So the zone is so powerful, but I find it to be very elusive, and more elusive if instead of just playing basketball, I was saying, okay, I need to get back into the zone.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than chasing it, just being.
So do you find that with mental performance, if you're trying to chase other aspects of it, it becomes more elusive as well? Or is this more of a performance-based thing with the zone? Like if I'm somebody who's self-aware of my anxiety and big pressure moments, if I try to focus on overcoming that, will I create more anxiety potentially? Or is it something that you want to create more adaptation skills to help cope with it?
I love that question because that's a conversation I have all the time. If I am trying to breathe, to get rid of something, or to deal with anxiety, rather than simply breathing to be in the moment, those two ideas feel completely different to me, right? If I'm trying to breathe, it feels almost like I'm trying to fake it, as opposed to if I'm simply breathing and preparing myself for the next approach, the next golf shot, the next pitch, the next shot at the free throw line. It's simply maneuvering through, the ins and outs of the games that are naturally occurring, as opposed to saying something along the lines of, I'm going to do this because I need to get rid of that feeling that was just happening, right? So progressive muscle relaxation, the breath. I'm not taking a breath to get rid of tension. I'm taking a breath to manage that tension so that I can perform on the next pitch. It's that symbolic transition more so than that elimination of the experience.
Okay. So when we advance through that process of helping ourselves become more successful in overcoming these adversities and different stuff like that, what strategy would we implement to kind of get started in that process?
Yeah, I have an acronym that I use for this, and I just call it NASTY.
Okay. I love that.
It clicks for a lot of the youth athletes for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it gels with like the college and semi-pro guys, but it sticks and it makes sense to me and they like it. So N is noticing. So
Okay.
that's the self-awareness piece. Like I notice that I feel tension. I notice that I'm distracted. I notice I'm nervous, yada, yada. Acknowledgement is the A. So I'm not going to personalize that experience. I'm going to normalize that experience of being nervous. That's something that naturally happens, right? We just talked about that. It's not a bad thing, but it just simply is. So I notice that it's happening and I acknowledge it without judgment. The S is kind of like an S with the power to the third. It's a symbolic skill to settle you down. So a symbolic skill would be the breath. So an inhale of the last pitch and exhale transitioning to the next pitch. So it's symbolic in that way. It settles me down. Obviously, we know the research with the breath. And then it settles me down into skill, something that we can practice.
Mm-hmm.
The T is a word I just used. It transitions us to the next rather than trying to remove the past or transitioning to the next. And then the Y of nasty is just yes, I'm committed to whatever my plan is, whatever my approach is on this next play, on this next possession, whatever it may be. So that's the acronym that I use, especially in the face of adversity. Nasty.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the nasty idea because, it kind of reminds me of being gritty, being a little bit tough, being a little bit resilient to what's happening around you, because you need a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of anger and hostility to be successful, especially in sport. Like even in the non-contact, me versus you, hand-to-hand type deal, like golf, you still got to be a little bit nasty at times, stick your nose in there and take a tough shot or make a tough read or whatever it may be. So I love the idea of the nasty to help you settle yourself.
It's that assertive mindset. It's
Yeah.
And I differentiate between passive aggressive and assertive being that right effort. I use that word effort a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a mindful approach, but being nasty can oftentimes, for the athletes that I talk about, get confused with like being aggressive. And to me, I think of aggressive, I think of a stray animal with rabies, right? Like
Right.
over the top. I see a fastball, I'm going to swing no matter what. Or it's early in the count, I'm going to swing no matter what. As opposed to nasty, in my sense, that I talk about with my athletes, it's more about understanding it's okay. If I get a fastball in the outer third and that's what I'm looking for, you better believe I'm going to swing at it.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a curveball, and if it's fastball outside of that, even if it's a strike, I'm going to take it and I'm going to say that's a check mark for success based on my plan.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So you've referenced baseball a few times. Do you work with more baseball athletes, or is it kind of a conglomerate of athletes that you're working with?
99% of the athletes that I work with are baseball players.
Okay.
I'm going to be getting into softball here shortly, I believe.
Good.
And one of my athletes is a dual sport athlete, plays football. So I talked to him a little bit about that,
Yeah.
but not too much.
Do you find that baseball and now probably softball in the same sense need more attention when it comes to the mental game, or do you think the mental game is something that's universal to performance and sport?
I watched the Celtics in the playoffs during the bubble,
Okay.
and I saw moments where like things like having a response routine would be really helpful for guys.
I got you.
I saw moments where guys would be on the free throw line, and not just the Celtics, in the NBA in general, college sports, basketball, where big time situation, it's just the pressure gets to them, and I think that can happen in any sport. So, although my experience is 99% with baseball players, I think the mental game is something that's happening all the time. On my podcast, I often ask a few folks, what percent of the game is mental and what percent is physical? And to me, it's 100% of both.
Yeah.
Right? They both matter. They both are happening all the time. Maybe an individual or a consultant, but they still have an internal game that's happening, whether they're aware of it or not. And maybe their mental game is so good that they're just playing and they don't need a deliberate, intention, and they're just operating and enjoying the game. And to me, that's the mental game too.
Oh
So
yeah. No, definitely.
I think it's happening.
All right. Sorry, hold up. My internet is being choppy. Or am I breaking up, or am I good now? Do I sound like I'm breaking up to you?
You were born.
I'm buffering, huh? Hold on one second. Let's see if we can get this to reset a little bit. All right, I think I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, better. Cool. I don't know what happened there. That was weird. All of a sudden I started like buffering out and doing that sort of thing. So
It happens, man. I just recorded one and I actually got kicked out halfway through and I like just clicked. I had like just clicked stop recording so that it would able to upload afterwards. So I feel your pain.
Yeah. So you were talking with it being universal for sport and being 100% of each. Okay. How do you manage 100% effort for both the mind and physicality when you come to talking to your clients about preparing for a competition? Because I find that that's hard to balance. I mean, in most people's minds, they're going to hear 100% twice, and they're going to be like, well, how do I do that? How do I manage mentally 100% and physically 100% without it becoming too much?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily even a conversation that I have with my clients, if
Okay.
I'm being honest.
Yeah.
The emphasis is more so on that, you know, their physical preparation plays a role in how they're feeling mentally and how they're doing mentally when the game comes. It's a conversation of, well, are you doing what you need to do to be prepared for when the moment occurs? And it's, if I just do the mental components of what my week looks like and I neglect the physical components, then can I really say that I'm adequately prepared? No. If you do the physical stuff and then you expect the mental things to just fall into place without doing the work prior, are you adequately prepared mentally? No. So it's just about knowing what works best for you in the build up to the game, during the game, after the game, so that you're doing them. And to me, that's kind of what I mean when I say that they're both a piece of the pie and
Yeah.
entirely the pie.
No, that makes sense. How do you get your clients to feel good about competing on a day where they physically don't feel their best?
I don't.
Okay. You don't
Right.
ever talk about that?
I do.
Okay. So
I say I don't in the sense of like, I don't want them trying to chase feeling better during the game.
okay. So then how do they have that confidence to go in and compete when they're not feeling great? That's the question that I'm kind of flirting with right now with a lot of my young athletes that I work with. They're like, well, I don't feel very good today. And I'm like, well, do you want to just go home? Like, like, what do we're here to play a game. So what's the other option here? So I'm curious what you do to help them kind of navigate that not feeling well and still going
Mhm.
out there and giving their best and seeing what happens.
I ask them, what else can you ask for somebody?
Okay.
And they say, well, I gave it my best and I tried, and it's not like I didn't prepare. Okay, then regardless of what the outcome is, if you put yourself out there and you show up and you're courageous and you're vulnerable, like that's what it's all about. I understand you want to feel 100% confident 100% of the time, but again, that's where I come back, Charles, to this idea of embracing, you know, the nuances and the uncertainty about being an athlete and being a competitor and performer. That, you know, we see highlighted folks, Channing Tatum, you know, on the television. There's no way that that guy's 100% confident 100% of the time, but he shows up anyway. And honestly, he's largely successful, air quotes for everyone who can see me through the podcast. It's it's just more so about engaging with them and understanding that good is good enough.
Yeah.
You can want to get better while at the same time knowing that you're good enough as you are.
Right.
So you can get better at something without being bad. And it's this non-dichotomous and non-polarized concept that I work with them on. So it's about embracing the difficult situations, and again coming back to that nasty acronym for them in moments where they feel like it would be beneficial, always staying in tune with what's going on for them, but saying like, okay, I have 40% today, I'm just going to give it all of what I have today. And you know, I did everything that I could beforehand, and I'm going to stay true to that. I'm going to trust that, and even if I don't quote unquote feel good, I'm going to give it my go.
Right. It sounds like it circles back to the idea behind just give your effort, do the effort part, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, I think it's a process thing,
Yeah.
right? If you're able to, I was working with one client recently, and what we decided to do is implement a post-game journal. And at the end of his games, he writes down what went really well, something that he feels like allowed him to perform well, something that he's working on, and how he's going to work on it. So from the latter two, when he pulls something that he wants to work on and how he's going to work on that, he adds that to his whiteboard of things that he does during the week to be prepared. And he knows, if I do all of these things to prepare and I've had success and I'm playing at this level, I'm competent and I'm prepared. Whatever my mind is telling me, like, you're not feeling 100%, you've done it. And now you're just doing the vulnerable part. You're showing up. And again, your effort, you nailed it.
Yeah, no, I like the post game journaling stuff, because I actually had a conversation the other day with one of the athletes that comes into my facility to train. He's about to head off to Western Michigan to play football. And I said, I want you to write down all the positive things that could happen during your time there. And then afterwards, what I want you to do is write down all the obstacles that could potentially come up for each of those positive things. Mm-hmm. And then think about what you'll do to overcome those obstacles. Because I find that if we only focus on the positives after everything we do, we don't set ourselves up to overcome the difficulties when they arise. Would you agree that there's value in doing both, where you have the positive and then you also don't necessarily harp on the negatives, but you look at them as a problem to solve instead of it just being a failure in your game?
What you're describing is it just totally becomes something that's productive for the person, right? So thinking that it's going to be rainbows and unicorns, that there's going to be no obstacles along the way, is unrealistic. And it's that if S hits the fan when it comes to X, Y, or Z, I'm going to have a plan in mind so that I can work through that. I don't even view that as necessarily negative, but it's just simply what will be helpful for you in these moments should they arise. If they don't, great. Proceed. Keep going.
Right.
But if they do, now you're prepared. Post-game reflection, I think getting feedback and building on that, that's not a negative experience. I think the negative experience is what you described of, like, I'm going to just go into self-destructive mode and, beat myself up. I think that's where negative becomes so obviously negative and counterproductive. But I often just come back to the words of productive, counterproductive, what's helpful, what's hurtful, because so often we fall victim to what you described of, I need to do something positive. I need to talk to myself positively, without even recognizing if you're someone who actually would benefit more from something a little bit more stern. So I think it just comes back to that awareness piece and understanding what's going to be helpful for me in this moment.
What do you think caused the shift to this positive mindset thought process that has occurred? Because I feel like it's been more recent that there's this like big push to think positively and good things will happen, and not be realistic about situations and own up to the fact that, look, when you pursue excellence, tough stuff's going to happen. You're going to face adversity. You can't avoid that if you want to be great at something. That's part of the journey. But for whatever reason, I keep hearing these ideas about think positive and do positive and positive this. And I'm like, I get some of that, but what do you think kind of spurred that direction or caused that to kind of come to where it's at now? Do you notice it in what you do?
I wish I could like pinpoint it, because I feel like I've noticed that throughout my entire life.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not alone. That's good.
No, I've definitely noticed like this. I think it's a societal thing, Charles, where it's just, we put labels on things. Like, this is good and this is bad. You have to do this. You can't do that. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. I always come back to Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, before it was Skip Bayless and Shannon, where people ate that stuff up because they were arguing, they were debating, and it's like, no, that person's right. No, that person's right. And it's either you're right or you're wrong. It's either positive or it's negative. It's either bad or it's good. And again, I've mentioned this a few times, but that polarization, it can be really detrimental. And I think there's a place for optimism, right? Like, realistic optimism is in the sense of, like, things are difficult, but there's definitely an end near. Thinking about the COVID pandemic, like, I'm not going to say that it's going to be over in 2 weeks, but there's clearly progression, and that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So there's a need for optimism, but I'm not going to sit here and just label COVID bad. I'm not going to label COVID over good, because there's some things and some intricacies there where I've personally benefited from COVID a lot. Like, I've gone to stay at home with my fiance more. I got a dog. I have an at-home gym. I've adapted my nutrition plan and so I don't know what exactly brought it about, but I definitely think that society plays a role. And I think it's been going on for a very, very long time.
No, I would agree with that, because I think I see that polarization in almost anything you look at. If you can look in any direction, any field, anything, and there's going to be a right side and the left side, and not much going on in the middle as far as communication, as far as how to handle that. And I'm a big believer that if we're both looking at a house, but you're looking at the front and I'm looking at the back, we're going to see different things, but we're still describing the same house. So there's gray area in there that we can come to kind of find if we were able to communicate through the things. And that's where I think some of those difficult moments that we face in sport and life, it's not just black or white. It a bad moment in a game could turn out to be a good thing for your career.
Right. And what happens is so often with athletes, I had a bad at bat. Oh, I just don't have it today. It's going to be a bad game. It's like there was a few bad moments in the game that maybe were just challenging. Again, trying to stay away from that word bad, but sure,
Right.
bad moment doesn't equal bad game. I had a huge conversation with one of my athletes. It was like one of the first times that I talked to him, a Division I baseball player. He's like, I was in the batting cage and I just had a bad round. I'm like, do you have a bad round, or do you have a bad swing? And then did you convince yourself that the round was bad? And he's like, oh, I suck today. I'm like, did your last swing suck, or do you suck at hitting today? Like, let's be really clear and transparent with that.
Yeah.
Like, if you recognize that your last swing was really bad and wasn't on point, that's okay. But if you're saying that last swing now means that the rest of your swings that you haven't taken are going to be bad, now we're just jumping to conclusions and we're labeling. And he just kind of was like, oh, so you mean like I can have a really bad swing and still have a great day hitting? I'm like, of course. I'm like, of course you can, man. But again, it's just
Yeah.
like the mind plays tricks on us to just, build relationships with these things and just to jump to conclusions and try to protect ourselves. The mind,
Yeah.
body, hardwired to protect us and to be comfortable.
Right.
If I say I had a bad swing and then I said, oh, the whole day is bad and it's over, you're kind of just saying, okay, I'm just tanking it in and I don't want to, try to work through that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of reprogramming through that adversity and rebranding that relationship with adversity in that way.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know how many times I saw a major league player swing at a pitch that you're like, that wasn't even close, and then turn around and hit a bomb.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Right.
that strike didn't end your at bat. And the other thing I find interesting with that conversation is, this is another one I have a lot of with my baseball and softball athletes, is they get upset about a bad cage practice. You're in a cage.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't hit well in the cage today. I go, does it give you a batting average? Did I miss something here? Because first off, I can't tell where the ball is going. Like, how can we help this next generation come to understand that the cage time is a time for you to fail and get better and grow, and not for a performance? You're not being graded on it. How do we help that next generation kind of come to understand that? What can we do to help them move away from trying to perform well in a cage? Because that doesn't translate to the field. You can have a great cage day and then go 0 for 4 in your next game.
Yeah. I think it's, first off, I think it's about deliberately training that adversity into the practice sessions and like encouraging people to make mistakes and stick with it and keep showing up. I think that's one thing. I come back to this example of my 8th grade basketball team. I don't know why that's coming up a lot today, but it sure is. Right-handed basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
I hated taking lefty layups because I was bad at them. But what do we do at the beginning of every practice? Layup lines. Run up and down the right side and then flipped it, and we doubled the time on the left side because every single one of our players, maybe one or two, were lefty, but 99% of our guys were right-handed.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to work on our weaknesses as well as building our strengths. And I think if we're encouraging that in our training sessions and saying, well, we need to make practice look like the games, deliberate practice, encourage setbacks and working through those setbacks, I think you're onto it, right? Like teaching your guys and gals that, we're going to work on curveballs. Like if you see curveballs in the game, like we're not going to just do these cute flip toss for an hour and a half. Like that doesn't help anybody. Right? Can you work on a mechanical thing during that? Sure. But for an hour and a half and we're just going to get feel good swings all day, like you said, we're not going to feel good all the time. So how do we work on not feeling good in practice? Challenge them.
Yeah, I think baseball is one of those sports that's probably the farthest behind. And I think they're catching up when it comes to the practice being game-like. It's hard to simulate live pitching in a practice setting. Now there's more ability to do it now with machines and some different stuff like that. But I still feel like so many players want to, like you said, feel good when they hit because nobody wants to fail. And so becoming more aware with that process and understanding that we can have a balance between both, I think will make hitters become more successful long-term.
Yeah. I think we just need to be almost like, I don't want to romanticize failure because I don't think failure is great. I don't think anyone should be seeking failure. And I think it's something that we choose to learn from as well as victories. But I think when we're training, like we need to allow there to be space for it to be okay for you to not hit the ball hard every single time. Yeah. And to not jump down a player's throat for their mechanics right away. And to not coach while the kids have the time to play. Like let practice be practice and training and deliberate and say, you know what, like this is going to be uncomfortable and we're deliberately doing that because you're going to feel uncomfortable in the game, and just be very clear like that. And then when it comes to the game, allowing the kids to trust that training so that they can now work through that during the game.
Yeah.
And then that's where like the post-game reflection comes in. What did I carry from training into practice that worked well? What didn't? What would I change? What maybe I wouldn't change anything. Stay the course. Right? So it's all about choosing to learn and to grow and to practice. But I think that starts with training and not just going with this traditional, feel good BP and we're not going to challenge anybody.
Right. Yeah. No. You said something interesting in there, and it kind of resonates with me because I don't know if you can see my hat or not. It says fail forward. So for me personally, I absolutely love the idea of failure, but you said you don't like having people seek failure out. I'm curious as to why you don't necessarily push that direction and what's your thought process on that? Cause I'm kind of curious as what do you want them to do then instead?
I don't want people like with the goal of failing. Right.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
I'm not going to show up to a game and say, I want to go for 5 today. That's essentially what I'm saying.
There we go. Okay.
And I think we oftentimes say failure, first attempt in learning. Failure is just learning. Well, is it? You're not attempting to learn after the performance. You're attempting to learn when you show up. Right. And you're not only learning when you make mistakes. When you're doing well, you reflect on that and say, what's allowing me to perform this way so that I can continue doing that? So I think when I mentioned like I don't seek failure, it's I'm not going into a game intending and wanting to do badly.
Right.
So if I do, am I going to take that opportunity to grasp something and get something tangible and to learn? 100,000%. But I just make it clear that I don't want us to romanticize that because we can learn from our wins and our losses.
No, that I 100% agree with. And I think what I was looking at when I talk about, I want my kids to fail and fail forward, it's more in a practice sense. I want them to stretch and become uncomfortable and be on that verge of, if you have success, you worked for it today, but if you failed, it was just because it's just outside your reach. Now, in a game setting, absolutely no. You should go in confident, believing that we're going to go compete today and whatever happens, happens, but not seeking failure in a performance competitive environment.
Again, it comes down to this gray area again. And I'm reading a book by Stephen Hayes, who's the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy. And in one of his chapters, he's talking about if we practice seeing gray, that gray becomes color. And I just closed the book. I'm like, that's too powerful for me to keep reading today. That was
Well,
awesome.
yeah, no, that's awesome.
So when we're talking about failure, right? Like I'm in the middle with you here. We're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Saying we don't always want failure, but we're not going to beat people up for failing because it's going to happen. And it's just about being in the middle and saying, okay, if I fail forward, great. Like I stretched myself, I got uncomfortable, and now I choose to learn. If I stretch myself beyond my measure and I don't fail and I actually move in the other direction, great. I learned from that too.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely kind of more in line with what I was feeling as far as how I present it. And so that's cool to hear it from a different perspective. And I absolutely love the if you keep seeing gray, eventually it makes colors, because I say similar things as far as we don't like to live in the gray areas because it's where it's uncertain. There's changing pieces. It's never clear. It's kind of fuzzy. It's like looking at an old TV and the reception's not quite clear. So you can kind of make out what you want to see, but most people grasp what they want to see and then create a clear picture. And it may not always be right, but it's their clear picture. And then that's their truth. And that's what they stick with.
Yeah.
Would you agree that kind of how you see like people kind of coming to moving the grays to the edges?
Yeah, I do. I think it's really easy to like be in a conversation and to like seek out something that you would agree with. Right. That's an example that comes to mind, like that confirmation bias of like wanting to hear something that you can agree with so that you don't feel like you're uncertain about something. Or even an example that may not be related exactly, but someone asks you a question of, hey, have you seen this before? And you kind of just nod even though you haven't.
Right.
Like, why am I doing that? And
No, I found myself doing that before too. Like, have you
yeah,
seen this? No, I haven't. Why am I? Wait, I'm nodding.
right. And I think it's just a similar conversation, although maybe not directly related to the gray area, but it's about not wanting to be uncertain about things. And so rather than saying, you know what, like it seems like you've seen this and I haven't, and I'm just going to say that, it's like I'd rather just be comfortable and not address it and say, yeah, I've watched that too. And
Yeah.
so I catch myself doing that all the time. And I'm like, wait, I haven't read that book. Why would I say I have?
Right. And yeah, the uncertainty thing is an interesting one, because I think a lot of people are afraid to be perceived as not knowing, and that uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. But the truth is, the people who are like me and you, I feel like we're constantly trying to learn more, which means we don't know everything. We are constantly looking for more answers and more solutions. So being okay with being uncertain is a good thing. It kind of leads us in the next direction of what we're trying to discover.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think more, yeah.
There's a lot of power. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, you're fine.
There's a lot of power in just saying like, hey man, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've found that that's helped my coaching immensely. When a kid will come to me and ask me a specific question about something, and instead of just giving them the answer they want, being truthful and saying, well, honestly, I didn't see what you are talking about, so I can't give you an answer, or I don't know the answer to that. Let me go find out and see what I can find out for you. Because so many times you have coaches just give them nah, it's this. And then of course the kid's going to believe it. And then the next thing you know, they're like, wait, that's not right. So I don't understand what's happening. So
yeah, I think it's similar with mental performance consulting, right?
yeah.
Like I have conversations with guys. Hey, what should I do if this? I don't know, Bill. What? I'm not sure. Like I'm not playing. Like,
Right.
what have you done in the past? What works for you? What hasn't worked for you? It's a lot of a trial and error thing. Are you comfortable with that? If you're not uncomfortable, let's talk about that, because that's kind of how it goes. Like I can't just give you a magic bean and say, oh, when you feel uncomfortable, you take this pill and then discomfort goes away and you go 4 for 4 today. So, and that's a joke that I give them right there. I'm like, listen, if I could give you that answer, we would just shut down shop and I'd say, hey, go get them here. But that's not how it works. And when you're willing to be honest and say that you don't know, honestly, it gives you a chance to maybe look it up if it's in the realm of coaching, talk to someone, consult with someone, and come back. I think that fosters the relationship. And then on the mental side, in the example that I pose, it brings that person back to being the expert of themselves, as opposed to me saying like, oh yeah, let me just throw this skill at you and then let's hope that it sticks. Right. Because then they're going to say, oh, like this guy's just a problem solver. I'm not going to do that. as opposed to engaging with them in a collaborative way, they're starting to think about that in session, and that makes them more likely to try things outside of session, then come back and say, hey man, that didn't work, or hey, that worked well. Oh, why did that work? And it just keeps blooming from there.
I love that. And for me, I've spent now a couple episodes getting a chance to talk to mental performance coaches. And what I love most so far to this point with every mental performance coach that I've talked to is the use of questioning to get an answer instead of just giving an answer.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we can all benefit from as a society, as a communications, like trying to build better communications as coaches, instead of always just, bleh, here's the answer. Take a minute, ask a question. In most cases, there's multiple solutions, but we take too much time just kind of spitting out the answer. And for me with the coaching, I've found I get more creative answers and better solutions if I ask, well, what were your options in this play? And let them give the answer instead of being like, well, you should have thrown it here or you should have done this. Tell me what you saw and what were your options. And all of a sudden they play it back and they've usually come to the same solution that I was going to tell them, but now they did it on their own. And now it's going to stick more and it means more to them.
I agree with you. I think that's spot on. And questions is something that I've just totally dialed into since starting the podcast, since in addition to being a mental performance consultant, I'm working as a therapist. So like that's a big component of the work that I do as a consultant too. And so I draw from those experiences, and oftentimes, sometimes just reflecting back what that person had said in a different way gives them more space to elaborate on what they said. An example comes to mind of someone says they're so anxious. You're worried about that. It's not necessarily a direct question. I'm just reflecting something that they're giving to me with different words. And then I just I let that fester there, and they continue to talk. Sitting with silence is something that most people are uncomfortable with. So reflecting that and sitting with it momentarily and just giving that person, again, the space to be the expert on themselves as the performer, oftentimes leads to those answers that they have within themselves. And that's my big thing. I'm all about empowerment. That's the sole purpose of my Go for Gold consulting. It's about empowering people to dig deeper into themselves. I can't do that by saying, yeah, go do this. That'll work. Right. And it's an engaging process. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know the answers to everything, because I have a mentor. I have several mentors, and I ask people questions all the time because I want to get better too. So it's about being humble and being, a collaborator with the person rather than trying to be a know-it-all.
Yeah, no, that's spot on in my opinion. That's how we grow. That's how we get better. That's how we perform at a high level. Basically that's the big piece that a lot of people miss is being willing to ask questions, being willing to be wrong, being willing and okay with growing opportunities and that sort of thing. So with that, what I want to do now is give you an opportunity to leave the listeners with ways to connect with you, get a hold of you, stuff like that. What do you want to put out there for them as far as reaching out to you and following your journey and what you're doing next?
I appreciate it, Charles. First off, this has been an absolute pleasure. You asked some thought-provoking questions for sure, my man. So I do appreciate your time and having me on. As far as, some of the work that I'm doing, you mentioned my consulting. I'll be having a website by the time this is released, knock on wood. It should be, you may need to edit this out. This may be, it's G for G, go for gold.net. So goforgold.net. It's GO, the number 4, GO, gold.net.
Cool.
And my Instagram and Twitter, I'll give to you, and you can share it in the show notes and whatnot. I think
perfect.
One of them has an underscore and one of them doesn't.
Yeah, so. No, I've got them both, so I can throw those in the show notes for everyone. They can follow along and see what you're doing next. Definitely, if you're on a Twitter platform, follow along. He's got some good stuff that'll keep you on your toes, get you going, doing the right thing. So, John, thank you so much for taking time with us tonight. I appreciate you coming out here. It's late on a Monday evening, so I appreciate that. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face. But remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and join us again next time as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But no matter what happens, remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review our show. We are all on the edge of greatness.